In Zen tradition, there is an ancient teaching called the 10 Bulls, in which a wandering seeker looks down and sees footprints on the ground. Someone has walked here before. It is a sign that the path is true and that peace is within reach. Tonight, we will walk this path and discover what these footprints have to teach us. Before we begin, feel free to share what time it is and where you're listening from. These footprints, these signs, are evidence that what we seek is real. They show us that others have walked this way before, and that a path to profound peace exists. As we move through these teachings, let your body settle into rest. There is nowhere else you need to be. The stories will unfold gently, carrying you toward that quiet place where the heart can finally trust that peace is not far away. It is near. It is findable. And you are already on your way. Let's begin our journey together. There is a moment in every seeker's journey when something shifts. We may have wandered for years, carrying a quiet dissatisfaction we could not name. We may have sensed that life held something more, something we could not quite reach. And then, often when we least expect it, we catch a glimpse. We notice something. A sign appears. The Buddha taught that the path to peace is not hidden. It is not locked away in secret temples or available only to those with special gifts. The path is here, woven through ordinary life, waiting to be noticed. But we must learn to see. We must develop eyes that recognize the signs. These signs come in many forms. Sometimes they appear through other people. We see someone who carries themselves with an ease we do not possess, a stillness that seems untouched by the struggles that trouble us. And something in us wakes up. We think, perhaps without words, that if they have found peace, perhaps we can too. Sometimes the signs come through words. A phrase we overhear. A teaching that lodges in us and will not let go. A story that stirs something we cannot explain. These are footprints left by those who walked before us. They tell us the path is real. Zen teaches that awakening is not a single dramatic moment. It often begins with small noticings, quiet recognitions, the gradual dawning that peace is not somewhere else. It is here, waiting for us to find our way. The ancient masters said that the truth is not difficult for those who have no preferences. This means that when we stop demanding that reality be different than it is, we begin to see clearly. We begin to notice what was always there. Let us explore how these first signs appear and how they gently turn our wandering into a journey with direction. In a busy market town where traders came from distant provinces, there lived a cloth merchant named Lero. He had built his business over 20 years through sharp judgment and tireless work. He knew the quality of fabric by touch alone. He could spot a good deal before others even noticed it was there. His store was always busy, his reputation solid, his income more than enough to provide comfort for his family. But Lero was not at peace. His mind was a marketplace of its own, crowded with calculations and concerns that never rested. At night, while his body lay still, his thoughts continued their trading. They weighed profits against losses. They anticipated problems that might never arise. They rehearsed conversations and negotiations, preparing for possibilities that stretched endlessly into the future. His wife had grown used to his distracted presence. She would speak to him over dinner and see his eyes drift away, following some thread of thought into tomorrow's concerns. His children had learned not to expect his full attention. They loved him, and he loved them. But there was always a wall of preoccupation between them. Lero was always there, but also always somewhere else. His eyes might be looking at you, but his mind was counting, planning, worrying about things that had not happened yet. He did not think of himself as unhappy. He thought of himself as responsible. This was what it meant to run a successful business. This was what it meant to provide for a family. The restlessness in his chest, the tightness that never quite released, these were simply the price of being a serious person in a serious world. He had seen his father carry the same tension. He assumed his sons would carry it after him. One morning, as Lero was arranging his fabrics for the day, smoothing the silks and stacking the rougher cottons for the farmers who came seeking practical cloth, he noticed an old woman making her way through the crowded market. She was simply dressed in undyed hemp, carrying a small woven basket, moving slowly between the stalls. There was nothing remarkable about her. She was one of hundreds who passed through each day, just another face in the endless flow of buyers and sellers. But something made Lero look again. The woman had stopped at a vegetable seller's stall nearby. She was examining some radishes, turning them gently in her weathered hands, holding them up to catch the light. And as Lero watched, he noticed something strange. The woman was smiling. Not a forced smile, not a polite smile, but a smile that seemed to rise from somewhere deep. As if the simple act of choosing vegetables brought her genuine pleasure. More than the smile, it was her stillness that caught him. The market was loud and chaotic around her. Merchants shouted their prices, each trying to be heard over the others. Customers haggled and complained about quality and cost. Children ran between legs, playing games that had nothing to do with commerce. Carts clattered over stones, and somewhere a dog barked endlessly at nothing. The air smelled of spices and sweat and the morning cooking from nearby stalls. But the old woman seemed untouched by any of it. She existed in her own quiet center, unhurried, unbothered, simply present with her radishes. The chaos flowed around her like water around a stone. She did not resist it or react to it. She was simply there, whole and complete in herself. Lero found himself staring. He had never seen anyone look so at ease. He had customers who were wealthy beyond measure, who arrived in fine robes with servants attending them, yet they carried tension in their shoulders and impatience in their eyes. He knew successful merchants who had achieved everything they had aimed for, who could buy anything the market offered, yet they seemed no more peaceful than when they had started with nothing. But this old woman, in her plain clothes with her simple basket, possessed something none of them had. The woman completed her purchase, placing the radishes carefully in her basket. She exchanged a few words with the vegetable seller, and both of them laughed at something Lero could not hear. Then she moved on, disappearing slowly into the crowd. Lero returned to his work, but throughout the day, he found his mind returning to her. That stillness, that ease, that smile over something as simple as radishes. How was it possible? Over the following weeks, Lero began to notice the old woman whenever she appeared in the market. She came every few days, always in the morning, always with the same unhurried presence. He watched her examine fruit with complete attention, as if nothing else existed in that moment. He watched her exchange words with vendors, her face warm and unguarded, genuinely interested in whoever stood before her. He watched her sit on a stone bench near the fountain and simply rest, watching the crowd pass by as if it were the most interesting thing in the world. Lero had never paid attention to anyone this way before. He had always been too busy with his own concerns, too wrapped up in the endless calculations of his trade. But something about this woman had gotten under his skin. She represented something he could not name, a possibility he had never considered, a way of being he had not known was available. One morning, without quite planning to, Lero left his stall in the care of his assistant and approached the stone bench where the old woman sat. His heart was beating faster than it had in years. He felt foolish. A successful merchant, approaching a stranger to ask how she managed to seem so peaceful. What would he even say? The woman looked up at him with clear, curious eyes. She did not seem surprised by his approach. She simply waited, patient as the stones around them. "Forgive me," Lero said, his voice rougher than he intended. "I am a merchant here in the market. I have noticed you over these past weeks. You seem so peaceful, so at ease with everything around you. I find myself wondering how this is possible. I have worked hard all my life. I have achieved what I set out to achieve, but I have never felt the peace I see in you. Can you tell me your secret?" The old woman smiled, the same smile he had seen when she held the radishes. "There is no secret," she said. "Or perhaps the secret is so simple that no one believes it." She patted the bench beside her, and Lero sat. The stone was cool in the morning air. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The market continued its noise around them. "You say you have achieved what you set out to achieve," she said finally. "But have you ever stopped to enjoy what you have achieved? Or does your mind always move to the next thing?" Lero considered this. He realized he could not remember the last time he had simply enjoyed something. Every meal was eaten while planning tomorrow's inventory. Every moment of rest was filled with thinking about what still needed to be done. Even when he had held his children as babies, part of him had been calculating, worrying, preparing for futures that might never come. "My mind never stops," he admitted. The words felt heavy leaving his mouth. "That is because you have trained it never to stop," the woman said gently. "You have taught it that its job is to always be working. It is doing exactly what you asked of it. A good servant, following orders faithfully. Then how do I ask it to do something different?" The old woman looked out at the busy market. Merchants were calling out their prices. A child was crying somewhere. A cart, loaded with grain, creaked past them, pulled by a tired donkey. Two women argued about the quality of some fish. Life was happening in all directions. "Do you hear all of this?" she asked. Lero listened. He heard the noise of the market, the constant human hum he had learned to ignore years ago. "I hear it," he said. "Just hear it," she said. "Do not think about it. Do not judge it. Do not try to do anything with it. Simply let the sounds be here and let yourself be here with them." Lero tried. At first, his mind immediately began to categorize. That was the vegetable seller calling out her prices. That was the bronze merchant arguing with a customer. That child needed tending to. Those women should settle their dispute and move along. But he kept trying to simply listen without commentary, to hear without thinking about what he heard. For just a few moments, the sounds became just sounds. Not problems to solve. Not things to understand. Not signals that required his response. Just the living noise of life happening, flowing through the market like water flows through a riverbed, Something loosened in his chest. Just slightly. Just for a moment. "There," the woman said, as if she could see it in his face. That is the beginning. That small moment when you are simply here, without adding anything, without needing anything to be different. This is available to you always. In the market. In your home. With your family. With your own thoughts. You have just forgotten that you can simply be present without your mind needing to work on everything. She stood slowly, gathering her basket. "The peace you saw in me is not something I achieved. It is not something I earned or figured out. It is what remains when I stop adding struggle to each moment. You can find this too. It is not far away. It is right here, waiting for you to notice." She nodded kindly and walked away into the crowd. Within moments, she was gone, swallowed by the flow of the market. Liero sat on the bench for a long time. The market continued around him, its sounds washing over him like waves. Slowly, hesitantly, he tried again to simply listen. To simply be here. The moments of ease came and went, but they came. Something had cracked open. Something had begun. He did not know it yet, but he had found his first footprint. A sign that the path was real. A glimpse of peace that told him it was possible to find. This encounter shows us something important about how the path reveals itself. Liero had walked through that market for 20 years without seeing what he needed to see. The old woman had probably been there many times before, but he had not been ready to notice. His eyes were too full of his own concerns. Zen teaches that readiness is everything. When we are ready, the teacher appears. This does not mean the teacher was not there before. It means that something in us finally becomes open enough to recognize what was always present. The footprints were there. We simply could not see them. The Buddha spoke of this as the turning of the mind. There comes a moment when something shifts, and we begin to look in a new direction. We start to question what we assumed. We begin to wonder if the way we have been living is the only way. This turning is not dramatic. It happens quietly, often through a single encounter, a single moment of seeing someone who embodies what we seek. Buddhism teaches that we learn peace not only from words but from presence. When we encounter someone who is genuinely at ease, their stillness speaks to us. It shows us what is possible. It leaves a footprint that we can follow. The old woman gave Liero very little instruction. She simply showed him a moment of presence and pointed out that he could find this for himself. She was a signpost, not a destination. This is the first sign. Not a complex teaching. Not a difficult practice. Just the recognition that peace is real. That someone has found it. That the path exists. That perhaps we can find it too. From this recognition, everything begins to unfold. In the same province, in a smaller town where the river curved past ancient willows, there lived a young rope maker named Suki. Her days were spent twisting fibers into cord, her hands moving in patterns learned from her mother and grandmother before her. The work was steady and useful, and Suki was good at it. Her ropes were strong and even, and the fishermen who relied on them trusted her craft. But lately she had begun to feel something restless stirring beneath her days. A sense that she was waiting for something, though she could not say what. The ropes she made were strong and sold well. Her small house by the river was comfortable, filled with the things she needed, and a few she simply loved. Her life was not unhappy. Yet sometimes, in the quiet of evening, she would stand by the river and feel an ache she could not name. Something was missing, something she could not identify. She told herself it would pass. Everyone felt this way sometimes. This was just what life felt like as the years accumulated. There was nothing to be done about it. Life was what it was. One evening, a group of travelers stopped at the inn across from Suki's workshop. They had come from distant mountains to the north and were passing through on their way to the southern coast. Suki paid them little attention at first. Travelers came and went. They were not her concern. She had ropes to make and customers to satisfy. But as night fell and she sat on her small porch, mending a frayed section of rope in the last light, she could hear voices drifting from the inn's open window. Two of the travelers were speaking together, their words carrying clearly across the evening stillness. One voice was younger, earnest, and questioning. But how can there be peace in a world so full of trouble? Every day brings new difficulties. We work and struggle and worry. And for what? How can anyone be truly at rest when life keeps throwing problems at us? The other voice was older, calmer. The trouble is not the problem. The trouble will always come and go. Rain falls and sun shines. Difficulty arises and passes away. This is simply the nature of things. Peace is not the absence of trouble. It is a way of being that is not disturbed by the coming and going. I do not understand. How can one not be disturbed? You are disturbed because you believe things should be other than they are. You argue with the rain. You resist the difficulty. This resistance is what disturbs your peace, not the rain or the difficulty itself. The rain does not care about your resistance. It simply falls. But your resistance exhausts you. There was silence for a moment. Suki found herself leaning forward, her mending forgotten in her hands. The frayed rope lay still across her lap. There is a teaching, the older voice continued. The Buddha compared the mind to a lake. When the wind blows, waves arise on the surface. When the wind stops, the water becomes still again. We cannot stop the wind from blowing. The wind will blow when it wishes. But we can learn not to add to the waves. We can learn to let the water settle naturally. This settling is available to anyone who learns how to stop stirring. And how does one learn this? By watching the lake of your own mind, by becoming familiar with how it stirs and how it settles, by noticing the waves without being lost in them, by discovering that you are not the waves, you are the water itself. You are the lake. When you know this deeply, the waves still come, the surface still moves, but they do not disturb your depths. The depths remain still even when the surface is troubled. Suki sat motionless on her porch as the conversation shifted to other things, to talk of the road ahead and the weather they might encounter. Her hands had stopped moving entirely. The words she had overheard were still ringing through her mind. She did not fully understand them. She could not have repeated them back or explained what they meant. But something in them had landed in her chest and taken root. The Buddha compared the mind to a lake. You are not the waves. You are the water itself. You are the lake. She did not sleep well that night. But it was not from worry. It was from something else, something that felt almost like hope. A door had opened that she had not known was there, a possibility she had never considered. The restless ache that had troubled her now had a direction. It pointed toward something. In the days that followed, Suki went about her work as usual. She made her ropes. She sold them to the fishermen. She ate her meals and tended her house. But something was different now. She found herself watching her own mind the way the traveler had described. She noticed when thoughts stirred like waves on water. She noticed when the stirring settled. She did not know how to make peace happen, but she knew now that it was possible. She had heard it spoken of by someone who seemed to know, and that knowing changed everything. She began to ask questions she had never asked before. She sought out the old woman in the village who was said to sit in meditation each morning by the river. She listened more carefully when wandering monks passed through and offered teachings at the crossroads. The words that once would have floated past her now caught her attention. They connected to what she had overheard that night at the inn. They were more footprints on the same path. The path had not yet become clear. She could not see where it led, but she could see the footprints now. She knew which direction to walk. This story shows us another way the signs appear. Suki was not looking for anything when she overheard that conversation. She was simply sitting on her porch, doing what she always did. But her heart was ready, even if she did not know it. The restlessness she felt had prepared the ground. When the words came, they fell into fertile soil. Zen teaches that the Dharma, the truth of things, is always being spoken. It flows through conversations, through encounters, through the natural world. The teachings are everywhere if we have ears to hear them. The question is whether we are open. When we are closed, the words pass by without landing. When we are open, even a few overheard sentences can change the direction of a life. Buddhism shows us that seeking is not always active. Sometimes it is receptive. Sometimes the most important thing we can do is simply stay open, simply remain available to what life brings us. The footprints may appear in unexpected places. A conversation not meant for us. A book opened at random. A phrase spoken by a stranger. These can all be doorways if we are willing to walk through. The Buddha himself spoke of planting seeds. A teaching might land in the mind and seem to do nothing for years. It sits quietly in the dark. Then one day, when conditions are right, it sprouts. What seemed forgotten suddenly becomes alive. What seemed like mere words becomes a living path. We never know when a seed is being planted. We only know, looking back, that something began. Suki's journey started with overheard words. She did not understand them fully. She could not have passed a test on their meaning. But she knew they pointed somewhere real. She knew they were footprints left by someone who had walked further than she had. And that knowing was enough to begin. That knowing is always enough to begin. Take a gentle breath now. Feel the air entering your body, filling you without any effort on your part. And feel it leaving, releasing without struggle. The footprints were always there. This is one of the most surprising discoveries on the path. We think we are finding something new, but often we are simply seeing what was present all along. The signs were scattered around us for years. The teachings were being offered. The peace we sought was nearby, waiting. We simply were not looking. We did not know how to see. Zen speaks of this as waking from a dream. In the dream, we believe we are seeing clearly. We believe we know what is real and what matters. But when we wake, we discover that our vision was clouded. We were looking, but not seeing. We were hearing, but not listening. We were living, but not fully present. The Buddha taught that ignorance is not stupidity. It is simply not seeing. We are ignorant of what is right before us because our attention is elsewhere. We are caught in thoughts about the past, worries about the future, stories about ourselves and others. While our minds spin in these familiar circles, life flows past unnoticed. The footprints appear and disappear, and we do not see them. But something can shift, a slowing down, a moment of true attention, and suddenly, what was invisible becomes visible. The world we thought we knew reveals depths we never imagined. The ordinary becomes extraordinary, not because it has changed, but because we are finally seeing it as it is. Let us explore how this seeing awakens, and how attention becomes the key that unlocks what was always there. In a town known for its beautiful temple roofs, there lived a tile maker named Goro. He had learned his craft from his father and had practiced it for over 30 years. His tiles were sturdy and well made, fitted together in patterns that kept the rain out and lasted for generations. He was proud of his work, and rightly so. Every morning, Goro walked the same path from his home to his workshop. It wound through the edge of town, past an old temple with weathered wooden gates, along a row of ancient cedar trees, and down a small hill to where his kiln stood waiting. He had walked this path thousands of times. He could have walked it with his eyes closed. And in a sense, he did walk it with his eyes closed. His feet knew the way so well that his mind wandered freely while his body made the journey. He would think about the orders waiting for him. He would plan which clay to use, which glazes to mix. He would rehearse conversations with customers or work through problems with his kiln. By the time he arrived at his workshop, he had no memory of the walk itself. It was just a blank space between home and work, a transition that happened while he was elsewhere in his thoughts. This was simply how life was. Goro did not question it. He was a busy man with important work to do. There was no time to waste on noticing things he had seen 1,000 times before. Then, in his 53rd year, Goro fell ill. It was not a serious illness, but it was stubborn. A fever that came and went. A weakness in his limbs that made standing at the kiln exhausting. His wife insisted he rest, and for once, he was too tired to argue. He spent weeks in bed, watching the light change on the walls of his room, listening to sounds he had never noticed before. When he finally recovered enough to walk again, his body was different. He could not move as quickly as before. His legs tired easily. His breath came short on even gentle slopes. The path to his workshop, which he had always covered in minutes without thinking, now required his full attention just to manage. On his first morning back, Goro set out slowly, carefully, one step at a time. He could not think about orders or clay or kilns. He needed all his attention just to walk without stumbling. And because his attention was finally on the path itself, he began to see things he had never seen before. The temple gates, which he had passed thousands of times, were carved with images of clouds and mountains. How had he never noticed this? The wood was silver grey with age, smooth in some places, rough in others. Morning light caught the edges of the carvings and made them glow. The cedar trees, which had always been just a row of dark shapes in his peripheral vision, were each completely different from the others. One leaned slightly toward the east. Another had a twisted trunk that spoke of some long-ago struggle. Their bark had patterns like rivers seen from high mountains. Their branches reached out in gestures that seemed almost human. A monk was sweeping the temple courtyard as Goro passed. He had seen this monk before, hundreds of times, a figure in brown robes moving in the corner of his eye. But now, Goro stopped and watched. The monk moved slowly, deliberately, the broom making soft sounds against the stones. There was a rhythm to it, a peacefulness that Goro felt in his own body as he watched. The monk looked up and noticed Goro standing there. He smiled and continued sweeping. Goro wanted to move on, but something held him. He stood at the temple gate, watching the broom move back and forth, feeling his own breathing slow to match its rhythm. The morning light fell across the courtyard in long golden stripes. Somewhere a bird was singing. The air smelled of cedar and incense, and the faint sweetness of the temple's garden. How had he missed all of this? How had he walked past this beauty every day of his life and seen nothing? When the monk finished sweeping, he walked over to where Goro stood. His face was deeply lined, but his eyes were clear and bright. "You are the tile maker," the monk said. "I have watched you pass by for many years. Always in a hurry, always somewhere else in your mind. But today you stopped. Today you are here." Goro felt embarrassed, as if he had been caught doing something foolish. "I was ill," he explained. "I cannot walk as fast as before. My body will not let me." The monk nodded thoughtfully. Illness can be a teacher. It slows us down when we will not slow ourselves. It brings us back to the body, back to this moment, when we have forgotten how to be here. Your body has given you a gift, though it may not feel that way. "I never noticed the carvings on your gate," Goro said. "I have walked past them for 30 years. "They have been waiting for you," the monk said simply. "Everything waits for us to notice. The gate does not mind how long it takes. It has nowhere else to be. It has been showing its beauty for 100 years, and it will continue for 100 more. We are the ones in a hurry. We are the ones who pass by without seeing." Goro looked back at the gate, at the carved clouds and mountains, at the silver-grey wood glowing in the morning light. He thought about all the mornings he had rushed past without seeing, all the beauty he had missed, all the moments that had slipped away while his mind was busy with things that seemed so important at the time, but which he could not even remember now. "I feel as though I have been asleep," he said quietly. "Walking through my life with my eyes closed." "Yes," the monk agreed. "This is how it is for most of us. We dream through our days thinking we are awake. We believe we are seeing the world, but we are only seeing our thoughts about the world. Then something shakes us, and we open our eyes, and we see that the world was always more beautiful than we knew, more alive, more present, more worthy of our attention. We were just not looking." He gestured toward the path ahead. "Your tiles keep the rain from many homes. This is good work. But perhaps now you will walk to your workshop with your eyes open. Perhaps you will see what has been waiting for you all along." Goro bowed to the monk and continued on his way. His legs were still weak. His breath still came short on the small hill. But he did not mind. He was seeing the world as if for the first time, The patterns in tree bark, the shapes of shadows on the path, the particular blue of the morning sky, which was not just blue but 1,000 blues shifting into each other. In the weeks that followed, as Goro's strength returned, he found that his new way of seeing did not fade. He could walk faster now, but he chose not to. He left home earlier so he could take his time. He stopped to watch the monks sweep the courtyard most mornings. He noticed how the light changed with the seasons, how the cedars looked different in rain than in sun, how each day's walk was actually a new walk, never the same as the day before. His work changed too. His tiles had always been well made, but now there was something different in them. A quality of attention that people could feel even if they could not name it. He spent more time choosing the clay, more time shaping each tile, more time watching the fire do its work. He was not rushing toward a finished product. He was present with each step of the making. His wife noticed the change. His customers noticed. Even his old body, which had seemed like a burden after his illness, now felt like a gift. It had forced him to slow down. It had opened his eyes. The footprints had been there all along, on the path he walked every day. He had simply never looked down to see them. This story shows us something essential about the discovery of the path. Goro did not need to travel to distant temples or seek out famous teachers. The teaching was right outside his door. The beauty was there every morning, waiting. The monk had been sweeping the courtyard for years, but Goro could not see any of it because he was moving too fast, because his attention was always somewhere else. Zen teaches that hurrying is a kind of blindness. When we rush through life, we see only our destination. The journey itself becomes invisible. We miss the carvings on the gate, the patterns in the bark, the sweep of the broom that could teach us about peace. We arrive at our goals having experienced nothing along the way. We achieve what we set out to achieve and wonder why we still feel empty. Buddhism speaks of mindfulness as the foundation of the path. This is not a complicated practice. It is simply the act of paying attention to what is actually here. Not what we imagine is here, not what we remember being here, not what we fear might be here, but what is actually present in this moment. The Buddha said that mindfulness is the direct path to liberation. Not because attention has magical powers, but because when we truly see what is present, we discover what we have been seeking. The footprints become visible. The way becomes clear. The world opens to reveal its hidden depths. We do not need to wait for illness or difficulty to slow down. We can choose to walk more slowly through our days. We can choose to give our attention to what is actually before us. The footprints are already there. The path is already present. We simply need to open our eyes. Take a gentle breath now. Feel yourself here, in this moment, exactly where you are. There is nothing you need to figure out, no question you must answer right now. The path does not only reveal itself through teachers and teachings, it speaks through the world around us, through trees and rivers and stones, through the turning of seasons and the falling of rain, through the small creatures that go about their lives without worry and the great mountains that stand unchanged while generations pass beneath them. The Buddha often pointed to nature when he wanted to convey something important. He spoke of the lotus flower that grows from mud, yet remains unstained. He spoke of the rain that falls equally on all things, without preference or judgment. He spoke of the moon reflected in still water, showing us how clarity arises when the mind becomes calm. These were not mere poetic images. They were teachings offered by the world itself to anyone willing to see. Zen masters continued this tradition. They found wisdom in bamboo bending under snow, in the sound of a frog jumping into a pond, in the emptiness of the sky that holds all clouds without grasping any of them. They understood that nature is always teaching, always pointing toward truth. We simply need to become students of what is already before us. For those who learn to look, the natural world becomes a book written in a language older than words. Every leaf, every stone, every breath of wind carries a message. The footprints we seek are not only left by human teachers. They are left by rivers finding their way to the sea, by seeds pushing through hard ground toward light, by the patient wearing of water against rock. These too show us the way. These too point toward peace. Let us explore how nature becomes our guide, and how the simple things around us reveal profound truths. In the forested mountains, where mist gathered each morning like a soft blanket over the valleys, there lived a charcoal burner named Nobu. His work was solitary. He lived alone in a small hut near his kiln, spending his days gathering wood, tending fires, and transforming timber into the black fuel that warmer lowland villages needed for their cooking and heating. Nobu had come to the mountains as a young man, escaping a life in the town that had never felt like his own. He had been an awkward child, uncomfortable with crowds, uneasy in the press of market streets and busy workshops. The noise of people exhausted him. Their expectations confused him. He had felt like a stranger in the world he was born into. The mountains offered him refuge. Here, the only sounds were wind in branches, birds calling to each other across valleys, the crack and pop of his fires. He could go days without seeing another person. When he did walk down to the village to sell his charcoal, he spoke as little as possible and returned to his solitude as quickly as he could. For many years, Nobu thought of himself as simply hiding. He was not seeking anything. He was not on any path. He was just a man who preferred trees to people, silence to conversation. His life was small and quiet, and that was enough. But something began to change as the years passed. Without intending to, without even noticing at first, Nobu began to learn from the forest around him. Not facts or skills, but something deeper, something that had no name. He learned patience from the trees. He watched them grow so slowly that no single day showed any change, yet over years they rose tall and strong. They did not hurry. They did not worry about whether they were growing fast enough. They did not compare themselves to other trees or fret about the future. They simply grew at whatever pace was natural to them, trusting the process that had created them. A seed did not try to become a tree overnight. It became a seedling first, then a sapling, then slowly, a full-grown tree. There was a rightness to this pace that Nobu began to feel in his own body. He learned acceptance from the seasons. Winter came whether he wanted it or not. The cold arrived, the snow fell, and there was nothing to do but adapt. He could not argue with winter. He could not convince it to be gentler or to leave early. He could not bargain with the frost or negotiate with the shortening days. He could only accept what each season brought and find his way within it. And he noticed that the forest did the same. The trees did not complain about the cold. The animals did not rage against the darkness. Everything simply adjusted, shifted, continued. There was wisdom in this acceptance, a kind of peace that came from not fighting what could not be changed. He learned about letting go from the autumn leaves. Each year, the trees released what they had spent all summer growing. They did not cling to their leaves. They did not grieve their falling. They did not try to hold on to what was clearly ready to go. They let go completely, trusting that spring would bring new growth. And it always did. The letting go was not a loss. It was part of a larger rhythm, a cycle of release and renewal that kept everything alive. The trees that released their leaves survived the winter. The ones that tried to hold on would have broken under the weight of snow. He learned about resilience from the streams. When rocks blocked their path, the water did not stop. It found another way, flowing around or over or under, always moving toward where it needed to go. When drought came and the streams shrank to trickles, they did not despair. They simply became smaller, conserving themselves, waiting for the rains to return. And when the rains came, they swelled and flowed with renewed strength. None of this was taught to him in words. There was no teacher in the forest explaining these lessons. But Nobu's years of watching, of living close to the natural world, had opened something in him. He began to see patterns. He began to understand things he could not have put into language. One autumn, a wandering monk passed through Nobu's part of the mountain. He was traveling between temples and had lost his way in the mist. Nobu offered him shelter for the night, some rice and tea, a place by the fire. The monk was grateful and curious about this solitary man who lived so far from other humans. As they sat together watching the flames, he asked Nobu about his life. Nobu found himself speaking more than he had in years. He talked about the trees and their patience, the seasons and their acceptance, the leaves and their letting go, the streams and their resilience. He talked about how the forest had taught him things he had never learned from people. The monk listened with growing wonder. When Nobu finished, the monk was quiet for a long moment. "Do you know what you have described?" he finally asked. Nobu shook his head. He had only spoken about what he had observed. "You have described the heart of the Buddha's teaching," the monk said. "Patience, acceptance of what is, non-attachment, flowing with conditions rather than fighting against them. These are what we study in the monasteries. These are what the sutras point toward. And you have learned them from the trees." Nobu was surprised. He knew almost nothing of Buddhist teaching. He had never read a sutra or sat in formal meditation. He had simply lived in the forest and paid attention. The Buddha himself learned from nature, the monk continued. He sat beneath a tree when he awakened. He taught in gardens and groves. He pointed to flowers and water and the changing moon to help people understand what words alone could not convey. He understood that the Dharma, the truth of how things are, is not hidden in books or temples. It is written everywhere, in everything. The forest is a temple. The mountain is a teacher. The stream is a sutra. You have been a student without knowing you were studying. You have been practicing without knowing there was a practice. Nobu sat with this for a long moment. The fire crackled between them, sending sparks up into the darkness. "I thought I was just hiding," he said finally. "Running away from a world I did not understand." "Perhaps you were," the monk said gently. "But hiding can become seeking. Running away can become running toward. The Buddha himself left his home and family to seek the truth. What matters is not why we begin, but what we discover along the way. The monk stayed for 3 days, waiting for the mist to clear. During that time, he and Nobu talked about many things. The monk shared teachings from the Buddhist tradition, and Nobu recognized in them what he had already learned from watching the natural world. The words gave shape to what he had known wordlessly. The teachings gave him a map for the territory he had already been exploring. It was like learning the names of friends he had known for years without knowing what to call them. When the monk left, Nobu returned to his solitary life. But something had shifted. He now understood that his years in the forest had not been mere hiding. They had been a kind of education. The footprints of the path had been all around him, pressed into the earth by deer, carved into bark by the seasons, traced in the air by the flight of birds. He had been following them without knowing what they were. His charcoal burning continued. His quiet life went on. But now, there was a different quality to his days. He was not just living in the forest. He was learning from it. He was being taught by every tree, every stream, every change of season. The path was beneath his feet. It had been there all along. This story shows us that wisdom is not confined to human sources. The Buddha discovered his awakening while sitting beneath a tree, watching the morning star appear. He did not receive the teaching from another person in that moment. It came from his own deep attention to what was present. Zen has always honored this direct learning from nature. The great master Dogen wrote extensively about mountains and waters as teachers. He said that those who see mountains and rivers as obstacles have not yet understood the Dharma, but those who see them as the Dharma itself have begun to wake up. Buddhism teaches that all things are interconnected, arising together in a vast web of mutual causation. When we study a single leaf, we study the whole universe. When we watch a stream find its way around a stone, we learn something about how to live. Nature does not philosophize or explain. It simply shows us how things work, moment after moment, season after season. For those of us who live in towns and cities, surrounded by human construction and activity, it can be easy to forget this teaching. But nature is still present, even in the most crowded places. A tree grows beside a busy street. Rain falls on rooftops. The moon rises over buildings just as it rises over mountains. The teachings are still being offered. We need only step outside, look up at the sky, and let the world remind us of truths we have always known but somehow forgotten. The footprints are everywhere, in forest and city alike, left by wind and water, and the patient growth of all living things. We are surrounded by teachers. We have only to become students. In a valley known for its orchards, there lived a woman named Ray who had recently suffered a great loss. Her husband of many years had died suddenly, leaving her alone in the house they had built together. The rooms that had once been full of conversation and laughter now held only silence. The future they had planned together had vanished like morning mist. One morning, for no reason she could name, Ray found herself standing at the edge of the neglected garden. She did not plan to work in it. She had no energy for work. But something drew her there, and she simply stood, looking at what had become of the place she and her husband had loved. A tomato plant had survived despite the neglect. It was scraggly and untended, but it had produced a single ripe fruit, red and full, hanging heavy on the vine. Ray stared at it. How had it grown? No one had watered it. No one had cared for it. Yet here it was, alive, producing fruit, doing what tomato plants do regardless of human attention. Something stirred in her. Not joy, not yet, but something. She reached out and picked the tomato. It was warm from the sun. She could smell it, that distinct green smell of tomato vines. Without thinking, she bit into it. The taste flooded her mouth, sweet and acidic and utterly alive. She stood there in the overgrown garden, juice running down her chin, and for the first time since her husband's death, she felt something other than sorrow. She felt the sun on her face. She felt the earth beneath her feet. She felt the tomato's gift of flavor and nourishment. She was, for just a moment, present in her own life again. The next morning, she returned to the garden. She pulled a few weeds, not many, just enough to clear a small space. The work was hard because she was weak from weeks of barely eating, barely moving. But there was something satisfying in it. The feeling of soil in her hands. The small victory of clearing even a tiny patch. She came back the next day, and the next. Slowly, over weeks, she began to reclaim the garden. She did not rush. She did not have goals or plans. She simply showed up each morning and did what the garden seemed to need. Watering when the soil was dry, weeding when the unwanted plants crowded out the ones she wanted to nurture, staking plants that had fallen over under their own weight, cutting back what had died to make room for new growth. The work was simple, almost mindless, and that was part of its gift. Her hands moved in the soil while her mind grew quiet. She was not thinking about her grief in those moments. She was not planning or remembering or wishing things were different. She was just there, in the garden, present with the plants and the earth and the warmth of the sun. As she worked, she began to notice things. The way seedlings pushed up through the soil, fragile but determined, reaching toward light they could not see, but somehow knew was there. The way damaged plants could heal if given time and care, sending out new growth from places that had seemed dead. The way the garden changed day by day, always dying in some places and coming alive in others. Death and life intertwined, not opposites, but partners in an endless dance. She noticed the insects too. The bees moving from flower to flower, carrying pollen without knowing they were helping the garden grow. The earthworms turning the soil, creating spaces for roots to spread. The birds that came to eat the insects, keeping the balance. Everything was connected. Everything had its role. Nothing was wasted. Her grief did not disappear. Her husband was still gone. She still missed him with an ache that sometimes took her breath away. She still woke in the night, reaching for him, and found only empty space. But the garden was teaching her something about how to hold that grief. It was teaching her that loss was part of life, not a mistake or a punishment, but simply part of how things are. The autumn plants died back every year, and their dying made room for spring. The fallen leaves decomposed and became soil that fed new growth. Nothing was wasted. Nothing was truly lost. It was all just transformation, one form becoming another. Her husband's body had returned to the earth. Perhaps, in some way she could not understand, he was part of the garden now. Part of the soil, part of the air, part of the endless cycling of life that never really ended, only changed. One afternoon, a neighbor stopped by to check on Ray. She was an older woman named Pim who had known both Ray and her husband for many years. She had brought food in those first terrible weeks, had sat with Ray when sitting alone felt unbearable. Now she found Ray kneeling in the garden, transplanting seedlings into a freshly cleared bed, her hands dark with soil. "You look different," Pim said, settling onto a stone bench at the garden's edge. "Better. More alive. There is color in your face again." Ray sat back on her heels and looked around at the garden. It was still rough, still recovering from its period of neglect. But there was life in it now. Green things growing, flowers beginning to bloom along the edges. The tomato plant, trimmed and staked, was producing new fruit. "The garden has been teaching me," Ray said. She was surprised to hear the words coming out of her mouth. She had not thought of it that way before. But as soon as she said it, she knew it was true. "Teaching you what?" Pim asked. Ray considered the question carefully. She wanted to get it right, to honor what she had learned. That everything changes. That loss is part of how things grow. That even when something dies, life continues. That I am part of something larger than my own grief. That holding on to what is gone only causes more suffering. That letting go does not mean forgetting. She paused, looking at the seedlings she had just planted, so small and vulnerable, yet reaching toward the light with all their strength. "My husband and I built this garden together," she said. "When he died, I thought the garden had died too. But it was just waiting for me to come back, waiting to show me that life goes on, even after loss. Especially after loss." The neighbor sat down beside her in the dirt, not caring about her clean clothes. They stayed there together as the afternoon light softened, watching the garden grow in its slow, patient way. This story reveals how the natural world can meet us in our deepest struggles. Ray was not seeking wisdom or looking for a path. She was simply drowning in grief, unable to see any way forward. But the garden reached her when nothing else could. It offered teachings not in words, but in the simple facts of growth and change, decay and renewal. It met her where she was and showed her what she needed to see. The Buddha spoke often of impermanence. He taught that all conditioned things arise and pass away. This can sound like a harsh teaching, a reminder of loss and death that we would rather not hear. But it is also a teaching of hope. If all things change, then even our deepest suffering will change. If nothing is permanent, then the grief that seems endless will also transform. It will not disappear, but it will become something different, something we can carry rather than something that crushes us. The garden showed Ray this truth in a way that no philosophy could have conveyed. Zen teaches us to find our practice wherever we are. For some, it is in the meditation hall, sitting in stillness and silence. For others, it is in the kitchen, the workshop, or the garden. Any activity done with full attention and an open heart can become a doorway to understanding. The work itself becomes the teacher. The doing becomes the path. Ray found her doorway in the soil, in the seeds, in the patient work of tending living things. She did not need to go anywhere special or learn any complicated technique. She simply needed to show up, to pay attention, and to let the garden show her what it knew. Nature does not hurry, yet everything is accomplished. This is one of the great teachings the natural world offers us. The seeds do not worry about whether they will grow. The flowers do not struggle to bloom. The trees do not force themselves to be taller or fuller than they are. Everything unfolds in its own time, according to its own nature. When we align ourselves with this rhythm, when we stop fighting against the way things are and start moving with them, we find a peace that all our striving could never produce. The footprints are in the garden. They are in the forest. They are wherever life is unfolding according to its own laws. We have only to kneel down, put our hands in the soil, and let the earth teach us what it knows. Take a gentle breath now. Feel the air that has been breathed by countless beings, that has moved through forests and across oceans before it reached you. You are not separate from nature. You are nature, learning to know itself. There is an old saying that when the student is ready, the teacher appears. This is not magic. It does not mean that teachers materialize from thin air the moment we become worthy of instruction. It means something simpler and more profound. Teachers are all around us, all the time, but we cannot see them until we are ready to learn. Our eyes must open before we can recognize who has something to offer us. The Buddha himself had many teachers before his awakening. Some taught him meditation. Some taught him philosophy. Some taught him through their example, both good and bad. He learned from forest ascetics and from palace tutors, from wandering seekers and from settled householders. Each one offered a piece of what he needed, though none offered the complete picture. That he had to discover for himself. Zen has always emphasized the importance of the teacher-student relationship, not because students are helpless without guidance, but because certain truths are difficult to see alone. We have blind spots. We have habits of thinking that keep us circling in familiar patterns. A good teacher can point to what we keep missing. They can ask the question that unlocks a door we did not know was there. But the teacher does not have to be a formal master in a monastery. Teachers appear in many forms. An old craftsman who embodies patience. A stranger who says exactly what we need to hear. A grandmother whose quiet presence teaches more than any lecture. The guide we need may be waiting in the most unexpected places, ready to point out the footprints we have been walking past without seeing. Let us explore how these guides appear and how they recognize something in us that we may not see ourselves. In a province known for its scholars and scribes, there lived a young man named Tomo who worked as a messenger for the government office. His job was simple. He carried documents from one official to another, traveling between towns on well-worn roads, delivering papers that were important to people far above his station. Tomo was good at his work. He was reliable and quick, careful with the documents entrusted to him, and he never complained about the long distances or the weather. But he did not think much of himself. He was just a messenger, a carrier of other people's words. The documents he transported were filled with elegant calligraphy and important ideas, but they had nothing to do with him. He was merely the legs that moved them from place to place. One autumn, Tomo was given an unusual assignment. He was to carry a set of historical documents to an old calligrapher who lived alone in the mountains. The calligrapher, known as Master Rensho, had been asked to restore some ancient texts that had been damaged by water and age. It was delicate work that only a few people in the province could do. The journey took 3 days. The path grew narrower as Tomo climbed, winding through forests of maple and pine, crossing streams on old stone bridges. He had never been to this part of the mountains before. The air was different here, cleaner and colder, and the silence was deeper than any he had known in the busy towns below. Master Rensho's home was a small wooden house built against a cliff face, sheltered by ancient pines that seemed to guard the entrance. Smoke rose from a chimney, thin and white against the grey sky. A garden of moss and stones spread before the entrance, arranged in patterns that seemed both random and perfectly intentional. When Tomo called out his arrival, his voice felt strange in the deep mountain silence. An old man appeared at the door. His white hair was tied back simply, and despite his years, he moved with an easy grace. But it was his eyes that caught Tomo's attention. They were sharp and clear, holding a quality of attention that made Tomo feel truly seen for the first time in his life. Tomo bowed and presented the documents. He expected a brief exchange, a signature confirming delivery, and then the long walk back down the mountain. He had done this 1,000 times before. He knew how these transactions went. But Master Rensho did not take the documents immediately. He looked at Tomo for a long moment, as if seeing something beyond the young messenger's dusty traveling clothes and tired face. As if seeing something Tomo himself did not know was there. "You have walked a long way," the old man said. "Come inside. Have tea before you go." Tomo hesitated. This was not part of his job, but something in the old man's voice made it difficult to refuse. He slipped off his sandals and followed Master Rensho into the small house. The interior was spare but beautiful. Scrolls hung on the walls, covered with calligraphy that seemed to dance rather than simply record words. Brushes and inkstones were arranged on a low table near the window where the light was good. Everything was simple, but everything seemed to be exactly where it belonged. Master Rensho prepared tea with slow, deliberate movements. Tomo watched, unsure what to say. He was not accustomed to being treated as a guest. Usually, he handed over his documents and left. No one invited him inside. No one offered him tea. When the tea was ready, they sat together on cushions by the window. The steam rose from their cups. Outside, a bird called from somewhere in the pines. "You carry important papers," Master Rensho said. "Do you ever wonder what is written in them?" Tomo was surprised by the question. "It is not my place to wonder. I am just the messenger." "Just the messenger," the old man repeated, as if tasting the words. "And what else are you, besides a messenger?" Tomo did not know how to answer. He had never thought about it. He was Tomo. He was a messenger. That was all there was. "I do not understand the question," he admitted. Master Rensho smiled gently. "That is an honest answer. Most people would make something up. They would tell me about their ambitions, their family, their place in the world. But you said the truth. You do not know who you are beyond your role." He set down his teacup and looked at Tomo with those sharp, kind eyes. "Let me ask you something else. When you walk these mountain paths, carrying your documents, what do you notice?" Tomo thought about his journeys, the roads he traveled, the towns he passed through, the weight of the bag on his shoulder. "I notice how far I have left to go," he said. "I notice the weather, whether it will help or hinder me. I notice where I can find food and shelter. So you notice what is useful, what helps you complete your task. Yes. And what about the mountains themselves? The trees? The rivers? The way the light falls through the leaves in the afternoon? Tomo was quiet. He realized he could not remember any of these things, though he had walked through them countless times. His attention had always been on his destination, on completing his errand, on being useful. The beauty around him had passed by unnoticed. "I see," Master Rensho said, though Tomo had not spoken. "You have been walking through your life the same way you carry your documents, getting from one place to another, doing your job, never stopping to notice what is actually here." He gestured toward the scrolls on the wall. "Do you see those characters? I have spent 60 years learning to make them. Not just the shapes, but the spirit inside the shapes. Each one is different. Each one carries something that cannot be put into words. This is what I have learned in all my years of practice, that the meaning is not only in what is written, but in how it is written, in the attention brought to each stroke, in the presence of the one who holds the brush." Tomo looked at the scrolls. He could not read the classical characters, but he could see that they were beautiful. There was life in them, a kind of movement that seemed impossible for ink on paper. "What does this have to do with me?" he asked. "Everything," Master Rensho said. "You walk through mountains carrying words you do not read. You pass through beauty you do not see. You live a life you do not notice. This is how most people live. They are so focused on where they are going that they never arrive where they are. They spend their whole lives in transit, never actually present, never truly here." He set down his own teacup and looked directly at Tomo. "But it does not have to be this way. You can begin to notice. You can begin to see what is actually around you. You can carry your documents and also be aware of the path beneath your feet, the sky above your head, the life moving through you with each breath. This does not require years of training or special abilities. It requires only the decision to pay attention, to stop being just a messenger and start being a person who is fully alive to his own existence." Tomo sat with these words. They seemed to settle into him, finding places that had been waiting for them without his knowing. "I do not know how to begin," he finally said. "You have already begun," Master Rensho replied. "You are here. You are listening. You are asking questions instead of assuming you already know the answers. This is how every journey starts. One moment of attention, one question, one small willingness to see things differently. The rest follows from there." He rose and walked to the table where his brushes lay waiting. "Stay the night. The path down the mountain is difficult in the dark. Tomorrow, when you walk back to the world of documents and duties, walk differently. Notice one thing you have never noticed before. Then notice another. Then another. This is the practice. This is the path." Tomo stayed the night in the old calligrapher's home. They spoke more over a simple dinner, and Master Rensho shared stories of his own youth, of his own awakening to the life he had been sleepwalking through. He had been a government clerk once, he said. He had spent decades pushing papers without ever looking up, until one day something cracked open, and he saw how much he had been missing. The next morning, Tomo began his journey back down the mountain. But he walked differently. He noticed the way the mist hung in the valleys below him. He noticed the color of the leaves, red and gold against the dark pines. He noticed his own breathing, the rhythm of his steps, the feeling of being alive in a body that moved through a world of endless beauty. He was still a messenger. He still carried documents from one place to another. But he was no longer just a messenger. He was a person waking up to his own life, one step at a time, and the old calligrapher in the mountains had shown him the way. This story shows us how a guide can appear in the most unexpected circumstances. Tomo went to Master Rensho's home expecting nothing more than a brief transaction. Instead, he received a teaching that would change the way he walked through the world. Zen masters often taught through ordinary encounters rather than formal lectures. A question asked at the right moment. An observation that cuts through assumptions. A simple invitation to pay attention. These can be more powerful than years of study because they meet us where we actually are. The Buddha taught that we are all capable of awakening. We do not need special abilities or rare circumstances. We need only to see what is already here. But sometimes we need someone to point it out. We have been looking in the wrong direction for so long that we cannot find our own way back. The guide appears and says, simply, "Look here." And suddenly we see what was always there. Buddhism emphasizes that the teacher does not give us anything we do not already possess. The awakening is ours. The capacity for presence is ours. The guide simply removes obstacles, clears away confusion, points toward what we have overlooked. Master Rensho did not transform Tomo into something new. He showed Tomo what had been waiting inside him all along, buried under years of merely getting through his days. The footprints we seek are often revealed by others. We think we are searching alone, but guides appear along the way, some for a moment, some for longer. Each one shows us something we need to see. Each one points toward the path that was always beneath our feet. In a region where the rivers wove between wooded hills, there lived a young woman named Mia, who could not seem to settle anywhere. She had grown up in a prosperous village, the daughter of a successful rice merchant, with every comfort she could want. But something in her was restless. Something refused to be satisfied. She had left home as soon as she was old enough, telling her parents she needed to see the world. She traveled from town to town, staying a few months here, a few weeks there. She tried different kinds of work. She met different kinds of people. But nothing held her. Nothing felt like home. The problem, as Mia understood it, was that everywhere was the same. The people were the same, with their small concerns and petty ambitions, their endless talk about weather and crops and other people's business. The work was the same everywhere she went, repetitive and meaningless, filling time without filling the emptiness inside her. The days blurred together into a grey sameness that made her want to keep moving, keep searching, keep hoping that the next place would be different. Sometimes she wondered if something was wrong with her. Other people seemed content with their ordinary lives. They married, had children, worked their land, and seemed satisfied. But Mia could not find that contentment. It was as if she had been born with a hunger that nothing could feed, a thirst that no water could quench. The only thing that brought any relief was the road itself, the movement from one place to another, the brief hope that came with each new horizon. She had been traveling for nearly 3 years when she came to a small village at the edge of the forest. It was not much to look at. A handful of houses clustered around a well, a few small fields stretching toward the dark line of trees. Mia almost passed through without stopping. It was the kind of place she had seen 100 times before. But she was tired. Her feet ached from the road. And there was an old woman sitting outside one of the houses, weaving a basket in the afternoon light. Something about the way the woman worked made Mia pause and look more closely. The woman's hands moved with a sureness that Mia had rarely seen. There was no hesitation, no wasted motion. The strips of bamboo seemed to know where they wanted to go, and the woman simply helped them get there. Her face was calm, almost serene. She looked like someone who had found exactly where she belonged. Mia approached without quite knowing why. "That is beautiful work," she said, nodding toward the half-finished basket. The old woman looked up with bright, curious eyes. "Thank you. I have been making baskets for 50 years. My hands know the way now. I just follow along." 50 years, Mia repeated. She could not imagine doing anything for 50 years. The thought made her feel suffocated. "You are a traveler," the woman observed. It was not a question. "Yes, I have been on the road for some time. And are you finding what you seek?" Mia was caught off guard by the directness of the question. "I do not know what I seek," she admitted. "I only know I have not found it." The old woman smiled gently and gestured to a wooden stool beside her. "Sit for a while. Rest your feet. My name is Hasu." Mia sat. She watched Hasu's hands continue their work, the bamboo strips bending and weaving, the basket taking shape. "I used to be a traveler too," Hasu said after a while. "When I was your age, I could not stay in one place. I thought peace was somewhere else. I thought happiness was waiting for me in the next town, the next valley, the next adventure. I searched for many years. What happened? Why did you stop?" Hasu's hands paused briefly, then continued. "I met an old basket weaver. She lived alone at the edge of a village, much like this one. I watched her work and saw something I had never seen before. A person who was completely at peace. Not because her life was exciting or her circumstances were special, but because she had stopped running." She looked at Mia with those bright eyes. "I asked her to teach me, not just basket weaving, but how to be at peace. She laughed and said they were the same thing. So I stayed. I learned to weave. And somewhere in the weaving, I found what I had been looking for all along." Mia felt something stir in her chest. A kind of recognition, or perhaps a longing. "What did you find?" "I found that peace is not somewhere else. It is not in the next village, or the next experience, or the next version of myself. It is here, in this moment, in this simple work of hands and breath and attention. I was running towards something that was never going to be found by running. It could only be found by stopping, by staying still long enough to let it catch up with me." She paused her weaving and held up the half-finished basket. "When I make a basket, I am not thinking about the next basket or the one after that. I am not wishing I were making something else or wondering if there is a better way to spend my time. I am here, with this bamboo, with these hands, with this moment. And in that presence, there is peace. Not dramatic, not exciting, but deep and steady and real. This is what the running was looking for. And running could never find it, because running is the opposite of presence. Mia sat with this for a long moment. The words disturbed her. They threatened the whole way she had been living, the whole story she had been telling herself about needing to search, needing to keep moving, needing to find the right place where she would finally feel at home. If Hasu was right, then Mia had wasted 3 years running in the wrong direction. "How can you be sure?" she asked. "How do you know you did not just give up? How do you know there is not something better waiting somewhere else?" Hasu laughed softly, a sound like wind through bamboo. "I do not know for certain. No one can know such things. But I know how I feel now compared to how I felt then. I was exhausted from running. I was always disappointed because nowhere was ever good enough. Now I am at peace. The days are simple. The work is satisfying. I am not waiting for something better because I am not comparing this moment to imaginary alternatives." She finished a section of weaving and held up the basket, examining her work. "You could stay for a while," she said. "Not forever if you do not want to, but long enough to learn whether there is anything here for you. Long enough to discover whether stopping might give you what running has not." Mia did not answer right away. Everything in her wanted to keep moving, to maintain the story of the search, to preserve the hope that the next place would be the right place. But something else in her was tired. Tired of the endless road. Tired of disappointment. Tired of looking for what she could not name. "I do not know how to stay," she said quietly. "I do not know how to stop." "No one does, at first," Hasu replied. "That is why we learn. We start by sitting still for an hour, then a day, then a week. We let the restlessness arise and we do not follow it. We feel the urge to run and we stay anyway. Slowly, slowly, staying becomes possible. And in the staying, we find what the running was looking for." Mia stayed that night in the village, and the next day, and the day after that. She began to learn basket weaving, though her hands were clumsy and the work frustrated her. She felt the restlessness constantly, the voice telling her that she was wasting time, that she should be moving on, that peace was waiting somewhere else. But she stayed, and Hasu was patient with her, never pushing, never lecturing, simply weaving her baskets and being a quiet example of what was possible. Weeks passed, then months. The restlessness did not disappear, but it grew quieter. Mia began to notice moments of something she had never felt before. A settledness, a sense that wherever she was in the right place. She learned to weave baskets, though she never became as skilled as Hasu. But the baskets were not really the point. The point was learning to be present, learning to stop running, learning that peace was not somewhere else. It was here, in this moment, in this work, in this breath. The footprints Mia had been searching for were not on any distant road. They were right where she finally stopped to look. This story shows us a different kind of guide. Hasu did not offer philosophy or complex teachings. She did not lecture or explain or give instructions. She offered presence. She offered the example of a life lived at peace. And she offered an invitation to stop running long enough to discover what was already here. Zen speaks of transmission beyond words. The deepest teachings are not conveyed through lectures but through being. When we encounter someone who embodies peace, who lives from a place of stillness we have not yet found. Their very presence becomes a teaching. We see in them what is possible. We feel in their company what we long to feel in ourselves. This is worth more than 1,000 books. The Buddha's teaching emphasized finding one's own path, but he also surrounded himself with a community of practitioners. We need others on the journey, not to tell us what to do, but to show us what is possible, to walk beside us when the road is difficult, to remind us, through their own example, that what we seek can actually be found. The guides appear, one after another, each one offering what we need at that moment. Mia had been searching in the wrong direction. She thought peace was somewhere she had not yet been, in some place she had not yet discovered. But peace was waiting in the stopping, not the going. It was waiting in the simple work of hands and breath and attention. The guide appeared in the form of an old basket weaver who showed her, without many words, how to finally come home to herself. Take a gentle breath now. Feel yourself here, in this moment, wherever you are. Rest now in the truth that you are already where you need to be. The Buddha's first teaching after his awakening concerned suffering. He did not begin with joy or liberation or the beauty of enlightenment. He began with the simple truth that life contains difficulty, that all beings experience dissatisfaction, loss, and pain. This was not pessimism. It was honesty. And this honesty, the Buddha taught, is where the path begins. We often think of suffering as a problem to be solved, an obstacle to happiness, something that should not be there. We resist it. We fight against it. We tell ourselves that if only we could eliminate suffering, then we would finally be at peace. But the Buddha saw something different. He saw that suffering itself can be a teacher, that our pain, properly understood, points us toward freedom. When we are comfortable, we rarely question our lives. We go along with the familiar patterns, the usual assumptions, the stories we have always told ourselves. But when suffering arrives, something cracks open. We are forced to look more deeply. We begin to ask questions we have been avoiding. We become willing to see what we have been hiding from ourselves. This is why difficulty can be a doorway. Not because suffering is good in itself, but because it wakes us up. It shows us that the way we have been living is not working. It creates an opening for something new to emerge. The footprints we seek often become visible only when the ground we were standing on gives way beneath us. Let us explore how suffering can point the way, and how the very things we wish to escape can lead us toward what we most deeply need. In a prosperous city known for its fine ceramics, there lived a pottery merchant named Darrow. He had built his business from nothing, starting as a young man with a single cart and a willingness to work harder than anyone else. Now, 30 years later, he owned the largest pottery warehouse in the region. His name was known throughout the province. His opinion on ceramics was sought by collectors and nobles alike. By every measure the world uses, Darrow was successful. His home was large and comfortable, filled with beautiful objects he had collected over the years. His wife was kind and capable. His children were grown and established in their own lives. He had money enough that he never had to worry about his next meal or his old age. He had achieved everything he had set out to achieve, and yet Darrow could not sleep. It had started gradually, years ago. A few restless nights here and there, But over time, the sleeplessness had grown worse. Now he lay awake for hours, his mind churning through the same thoughts over and over. Worries about his business, even though it was thriving. Fears about the future, even though he was secure. A gnawing sense that something was wrong, even though he could not say what. During the day, he hid his exhaustion behind a mask of confidence. He made decisions, gave orders, negotiated deals. He played the role of the successful merchant so well that no one suspected how hollow he felt inside. But at night, when the mask came off, the emptiness was unbearable. He tried everything he could think of. Herbal remedies from the apothecary, warm baths before bed, avoiding rich foods in the evening. He even consulted a doctor who found nothing wrong with his body and suggested that perhaps his mind was troubled. This made Darrow angry. His mind was not troubled. He was a successful man. Successful men did not have troubled minds. But the sleeplessness continued, and with it came a growing despair. What was the point of all he had built if he could not enjoy it? What good was success if it brought no peace? He had spent his whole life climbing a mountain, and now that he had reached the top, he found nothing there but wind and emptiness. One evening, unable to bear another sleepless night in his fine home, Darrow walked out into the city streets. He walked without direction, letting his feet carry him where they would. The streets were quiet at this hour, the shops closed, the market stalls empty. A few lanterns glowed in windows. Somewhere a dog barked once and fell silent. He found himself at the edge of the city, where a small temple stood in a grove of old trees. He had passed this temple countless times without ever entering. Temples were for the devout, for those seeking comfort in ritual and tradition. Darrow had always considered himself too practical for such things. But tonight, something drew him through the gate. The temple grounds were peaceful, lit by a few stone lanterns along the path. The main hall was dark, but a smaller building to the side showed light through its paper screens. Without quite knowing why, Darrow walked toward it. Inside, he found an old monk sitting in meditation. The monk's eyes were closed, his posture still, his face peaceful in a way that made Darrow's heart ache with longing. This was what he had been seeking without knowing it. This stillness, this peace. The monk opened his eyes and looked at Darrow without surprise, as if late-night visitors were perfectly normal. "You are troubled," the monk said. It was not a question. Darrow sank down onto a cushion near the door. He had not planned to speak, but the words came anyway. "I have everything I ever wanted. A successful business, a comfortable life, a family that loves me, but I cannot sleep. I cannot find peace. There is an emptiness inside me that nothing fills. I have achieved everything, and it means nothing." He heard the bitterness in his own voice and felt ashamed. What right did he have to complain? There were people with real problems, real suffering. He was just a rich man who could not sleep. The monk nodded slowly. "You have discovered something important. Something many people never discover until it is too late." "What have I discovered? That success is meaningless? That I have wasted my life? No. You have discovered that what you were seeking cannot be found where you were looking. You sought peace in achievement, in accumulation, in the respect of others. These things are not bad, but they cannot give you what you truly need. You climbed the wrong mountain. Darrow felt a flash of anger. Then what is the right mountain? Where should I have been looking? The monk smiled gently. The peace you seek is not outside you. It is not something you can earn or buy or achieve. It is already here, already present, waiting for you to notice. But you have been so busy climbing that you never stopped to look. He gestured to the cushion across from him. Sit with me for a while. Do nothing. Seek nothing. Just sit and breathe and be here. Let the striving rest for a few moments. Darrow wanted to argue. He wanted to point out that doing nothing was not a solution, that problems required action, that his practical mind needed something more concrete than sitting and breathing. But he was so tired. Tired of trying. Tired of failing to find what he needed. So he moved to the cushion and sat. At first, his mind raced even faster than usual. Thoughts about his business, his sleeplessness, his frustration with this simple monk who probably knew nothing about the real world. Thoughts about how foolish he must look, a wealthy merchant sitting in a temple in the middle of the night. Thoughts about all the things he should be doing instead of sitting here doing nothing. But the monk said nothing. He simply sat, breathing quietly, present and peaceful. And somehow that silence, that stillness, began to seep into Darrow. Not because he was trying to be still, but because the monk's presence was like a calm lake, and Darrow was a stone that had been thrown into it. The ripples gradually settled. Gradually, almost imperceptibly, something shifted in Darrow. The racing slowed. The thoughts continued, but they seemed less urgent, less demanding. They arose and passed away, and he did not have to follow each one. He noticed his own breathing, the rise and fall of his chest, the simple fact that he was alive in this moment, in this small room, in the quiet of the night. He noticed the flickering of the lantern, the smell of incense, the distant sound of night insects. For just a few moments, the emptiness lifted. He felt something he had not felt in years. A sense of being okay. Not because anything had changed in his life, not because his problems had been solved, but because he had stopped fighting. He had stopped striving. He had let himself simply be, without needing to achieve or fix or improve anything. The monk opened his eyes. There. Did you feel it? Darrow nodded, not trusting himself to speak. His eyes were wet, though he could not have said why. That peace is always available. It is what remains when you stop adding struggle to each moment. You cannot achieve it because it is not an achievement. You can only allow it. You have been trying so hard to find peace that your trying itself was blocking it. Darrow sat with this for a long time. The night deepened around them. The lantern flickered and steadied. My suffering brought me here, he finally said. If I had been sleeping well, if I had been content with my success, I would never have walked through your gate. Yes, the monk agreed. This is the gift of suffering. It shows us that the way we have been living is not working. It opens us to something new. Many people have everything you have and never question their lives. They stay comfortable and asleep. But your discomfort woke you up. It brought you here, to this moment, to this possibility. Darrow returned to the temple many times in the months that followed. He learned to sit in meditation, though his busy mind resisted at first. He learned to notice when he was striving and to let the striving rest. He learned that the emptiness he had felt was not a defect, but a messenger, pointing him toward what he had been missing. His business continued. His life continued. But something had changed at the center of it all. He had found a peace that did not depend on achievement or accumulation. A peace that was available in any moment, if he only stopped struggling long enough to notice it. And it had started with suffering, with sleepless nights and gnawing emptiness. The very things he had wished away had been the footprints leading him home. This story shows us how suffering can be a doorway rather than merely a burden. Darrow had everything the world says should make us happy, yet he was not at peace. His suffering was not a sign that something was wrong with him. It was a sign that something was right. It was his deeper self, calling him toward what he truly needed, refusing to let him stay asleep in comfortable numbness. The Buddha taught that the first step on the path is recognizing suffering. Not denying it, not running from it, not pretending everything is fine when it is not. Just seeing clearly that there is dissatisfaction, that something is not working, that the life we are living is not bringing us peace. This honest seeing is the beginning of freedom. Without it, we stay asleep, going through the motions, never questioning the assumptions that keep us stuck. We can live our entire lives on the surface, never diving into the depths where true peace waits. Zen speaks of the great doubt as essential to awakening. This is not skepticism or negativity. It is the genuine questioning that arises when our usual answers stop working, when success does not bring peace, when achievement does not bring satisfaction, when everything we thought we wanted leaves us empty and wondering what the point of it all might be. In that doubt, in that dissatisfaction, something can open. We become willing to look in new directions. We become humble enough to admit we do not know the way. Buddhism shows us that suffering is not punishment. It is not a sign that we have failed or that we are broken. It is simply the friction that arises when we are living out of alignment with reality. When we stop fighting this friction and start listening to it, it becomes a guide. It shows us where we are stuck. It points us toward what we have been missing. The footprints appear precisely where the ground gives way beneath us. In a valley where the plum trees bloomed each spring in clouds of pink and white, there lived a woman named Kimmy who had devoted her life to a single dream. She wanted to create a school for the village children, a place where they could learn to read and write and think, skills that had been denied to most people of her generation. For 15 years, she had worked toward this dream. She had saved every coin she could spare from her work as a seamstress. She had petitioned officials for permission. She had gathered books and materials, storing them carefully in wooden chests. She had found a building, an old storehouse that could be converted into classrooms. She had recruited other women who shared her vision and were willing to teach. Everything was finally coming together. The permissions had been granted. The building was being prepared. The first students would arrive in just a few months. After all these years, her dream was about to become real. And then the flood came. It was the worst flood in living memory. The river burst its banks after days of heavy rain, sending water rushing through the lower parts of the village. The old storehouse where Kimmy had gathered her books and materials was directly in the flood's path. When the waters finally receded, there was nothing left. The books were ruined, their pages turned to pulp. The building's walls had collapsed. The work of 15 years had been swept away in a single night. Kimmy stood in the wreckage and felt something inside her break. Not anger, though that would come later. Not even grief, though that would come too. Just a vast, terrible emptiness. As if the flood had swept away not just her school but her very reason for living. As if the water had rushed through her own heart and carried off everything that mattered. In the weeks that followed, Kimmy could barely function. She continued her work as a seamstress because she had to eat, because her hands remembered what to do even when her heart was numb. But her movements were mechanical, her eyes hollow. The needle went in and out. The thread pulled through. The garments took shape. But she was not really there. Friends tried to comfort her, but their words felt distant and meaningless. What could anyone say? 15 years of work, gone in a single night. A dream that had given shape to her whole adult life, destroyed by water and mud. Some friends told her to have faith that things would work out. Others told her she was strong and would rebuild. But she did not feel strong. She felt empty. She felt like the hollow shell of a person going through the motions of living. One morning, a traveling monk passed through the village. He had been on the road for many years, walking from place to place, offering teachings to whoever wished to hear. He was old and weathered, his robes patched in so many places they seemed more patched than original cloth, but his eyes held a kindness that made people want to speak to him, to share their troubles, to seek his counsel. Kimmy did not seek him out. She had no interest in teachings or philosophy. What good were words when the world had taken everything? What good was wisdom when you had lost the only thing that gave your life meaning? But the monk found her anyway, sitting outside her small home in the morning light, staring at nothing, her hands idle in her lap for once. "You have lost something precious," he said, settling onto a stone near her. Kimmy looked at him with dull eyes. "My life's work. My dream. Everything I cared about." The monk nodded. "I heard about the flood. I am sorry for what was lost. Sorry does not rebuild a school. Sorry does not bring back 15 years of work." "No," the monk agreed. "It does not. Nothing can bring back what is gone. That is the nature of things. They arise and they pass away. Even our greatest works, even our most precious dreams." Kimmy felt anger flicker inside her. "Is that your teaching? That nothing lasts, so why bother caring? I have heard such philosophy before. It brings no comfort." The monk smiled gently. "That is not my teaching. I do not say that caring is pointless. I say that loss is part of life, not a mistake or a punishment. When we resist this truth, we add suffering to suffering. But when we accept it, something surprising can happen." "What can possibly happen?" "My school is gone. My dream is dead. Dreams can die and be reborn. Buildings can be destroyed and rebuilt. The flood took your materials and your storehouse. Did it take your knowledge? Did it take your love for the children? Did it take the other women who shared your vision?" Kimmy was silent. She had not thought about it this way. She had been so lost in what was gone that she had not considered what remained. "The dream is not the building," the monk continued. "The dream is not the books, though books are helpful. The dream is something that lives in you, in your heart and mind. The flood could not touch that. It is still here, waiting for you to notice it. Kimmy felt something shift, just slightly, in the heaviness that had been crushing her. But how do I begin again? I am not young anymore. I do not have another 15 years to save and gather and prepare. Perhaps you do not need 15 years. Perhaps the first school was preparation for a different kind of beginning. You know now what is possible. You have allies who believe in the vision. You have learned lessons that only experience can teach. The flood took things that can be replaced. It could not take what truly matters. The monk reached into his bag and pulled out a small, worn book. Its pages were yellowed with age, its binding frayed. This was given to me many years ago by a teacher who had lost everything in a fire. His library, his manuscripts, the work of his lifetime. He told me that the fire was the greatest teaching he ever received. It showed him that his attachment to things had been obscuring his understanding of what truly mattered. After the fire, he became a greater teacher than before because he was no longer holding on so tightly. He offered the book to Kimmy. He gave me this one book that survived the fire. He said it was enough. He said that sometimes losing everything shows us how little we actually need. Kimmy took the book with trembling hands. She did not open it. She just held it, feeling its weight, its realness. I wanted to give up, she said quietly. I wanted to stop caring about anything because caring leads to loss. Yes, that is one response to suffering. To close down. To protect ourselves by not wanting anything. But there is another way. We can let the loss open us instead of close us. We can let it teach us what matters and what does not. We can let it make us wiser and more compassionate, not harder and more bitter. He rose to leave, adjusting his pack on his shoulders. Your dream is not dead. It is waiting. The flood cleared away what could be cleared. What remains is essential. Build from there. And perhaps this time, build with open hands, knowing that everything you create will someday pass away. This knowing does not make the building less worthwhile. It makes it more precious, more honest, more true. Kimmy watched him walk away down the dusty road. She sat for a long time with the old book in her hands, feeling the shift that had begun inside her. The emptiness was still there, but it was different now. It was not only loss, it was also space. Space where something new could grow. In the months that followed, Kimmy did begin again. Not by trying to recreate what was lost, but by starting fresh with what remained. She gathered the women who had shared her vision. They met in borrowed rooms, in homes, under trees, when the weather was good. They taught with whatever books they could find, and when there were no books, they taught from memory and experience. The school that eventually emerged was simpler than what Kimmy had originally planned, but it was also stronger. Built not on accumulated materials but on shared commitment. Built with open hands, knowing that it too would someday pass away. And in that openness, there was a freedom Kimmy had never known before. A peace that did not depend on things going according to plan. The flood had taken everything, and in taking everything, it had shown her what could not be taken. The dream was still alive. It had simply found a different form. This story shows us how loss can become a doorway to deeper understanding. Kimmy's dream was not destroyed by the flood. It was transformed. The suffering she experienced became a teaching, showing her the difference between what is essential and what is merely helpful. The Buddha taught that attachment is the root of suffering. This does not mean we should not care about anything. It means we should hold our caring with open hands, knowing that everything changes, everything passes, everything transforms. When we cling tightly to how things should be, we suffer when they change. When we hold our dreams loosely, we can adapt when circumstances shift. Zen teaches that obstacles are the path. The things that seem to block our way are often exactly what we need to encounter. They break our rigid expectations. They force us to be creative. They show us capacities we did not know we had. The flood that destroyed Kimmy's storehouse also cleared away assumptions that had been limiting her vision. Buddhism shows us that every ending contains a beginning. The falling leaves of autumn become the soil that feeds spring growth. The crumbling of old forms makes space for new ones to emerge. When we can see our losses this way, not as endings but as transformations, the suffering we feel becomes bearable. It becomes meaningful. It becomes a footprint on the path. Take a gentle breath now. Feel yourself held by this moment exactly as it is. Finding the footprints is not enough. We must choose to follow them. This is where many seekers falter. They glimpse the path. They see the signs pointing toward peace. They feel the stirring of something new inside them. But then they hesitate. They look back at the familiar life they have been living. They think of all they might lose, all the risks they might take, all the ways things could go wrong, and they turn away. The Buddha spoke of the path as something that must be walked, not just understood, not just believed in, but actually walked. Step by step, day by day. This walking requires something from us. It requires trust. Trust that the footprints lead somewhere real. Trust that the glimpses we have seen are not illusions. Trust that we have the strength to continue even when the way grows difficult. It also requires courage. The courage to leave behind what is familiar. The courage to disappoint those who expect us to stay the same. The courage to face our own doubts and fears and keep going anyway. This courage is not the absence of fear. It is the willingness to move forward despite fear. To take the next step even when we cannot see where the path leads. Zen teaches that the journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. This simple truth is easy to say and difficult to live, but it points to something essential. We do not need to see the whole path before we begin. We do not need certainty or guarantees. We need only the willingness to take one step, then another, then another. The path reveals itself to those who walk it. Let us explore what it means to follow the trail. What it takes to begin, and what it takes to continue. On a stretch of coast where the fishing was good and the storms were fierce, there lived a man named Boro who had fished these waters all his life. His father had been a fisherman, and his father before him, going back generations beyond counting. Boro knew the sea the way he knew his own hands. He knew where the fish gathered in each season. He knew how to read the clouds for coming weather. He knew the rhythms of tide and current that had governed his family's life for as long as anyone could remember. It was a good life in many ways. Honest work, fresh air, the satisfaction of bringing in a catch that would feed his village. Boro had a wife who loved him, children who were growing strong, a place in a community that valued what he did. By any reasonable measure, He should have been content. But something had been stirring in him lately. A restlessness he could not name. A sense that there was more to life than the endless cycle of fishing and mending nets and fishing again. He had begun to notice things he had never noticed before. The way the morning light fell on the water. The strange peace that sometimes descended when he was alone on his boat, far from shore. The questions that arose in the quiet moments. Questions about meaning and purpose and what it all added up to in the end. He had overheard travelers talking about teachers in the distant mountains who taught ways to find peace. He had seen monks passing through the village, their faces calm in a way that made his heart ache with longing. He had found himself lingering at the edge of their teachings when they stopped to speak in the village square, hungry for something he could not quite name. The footprints were there. He could see them clearly now. They pointed towards something different, something that called to a part of him he had not known existed. But following them would mean change. It would mean leaving, at least for a time, the only life he had ever known. It would mean disappointing people who depended on him, who expected him to be what he had always been. The fear held him back. What if he was wrong? What if this restlessness was just foolishness, a middle-aged man's fantasy about a life he was not meant to live? What if he left his fishing and his family to chase something that did not exist and came back with nothing but shame and regret? He thought of what the other fishermen would say. He thought of the secure and predictable life he would be risking for something he could not even properly name. So he stayed. He fished. He mended his nets. He sat in his boat on the grey water and felt the ache growing stronger. He watched the monks pass through and felt something in him reach out toward them, then pull back in fear. The footprints were there, clear as the tide line on the beach, but he could not bring himself to take the first step. Days turned to weeks. Weeks turned to months. The call did not fade, but he learned to live with it, the way you learn to live with a wound that never quite heals. One evening, as the autumn winds began to blow cold from the north, Boro sat with his elderly father on the rocks above the harbor. The old man had stopped fishing years ago, his body too worn for the work, his hands too stiff to handle the nets. But he still came to watch the boats come in each day. It was his way of staying connected to the life he had lived. They sat in companionable silence as they often did, watching the sun sink toward the water, painting the clouds in shades of amber and rose. "Something is troubling you," his father said after a while. It was not a question. The old man had always been able to read his son, even when Boro was a child trying to hide some mischief. "You have been carrying something heavy for a long time now. I see it in the way you walk. I hear it in the silences between your words." Boro hesitated. He had not spoken of his restlessness to anyone, not even his wife. It felt shameful somehow, like a betrayal of everything his family had built over generations. How could he explain that the life they had given him, the life that should have been enough, was not enough? How could he say such a thing without hurting everyone he loved? "I have been feeling unsettled," he finally said, the words coming slowly. "There is something calling me, something I cannot explain. I feel it when I am alone on the water. I feel it when the monks pass through. A pull toward something different, something more. But I am afraid to follow it. I am afraid of what I might lose. I am afraid of being a fool." His father was quiet for a long time, watching the orange light spread across the waves like fire on water. The wind picked up, carrying the smell of salt and seaweed. Somewhere below them, the boats creaked against their moorings. "When I was your age," he said slowly, "I felt the same thing. A pull towards something I could not name, a sense that there was more to life than what I knew." Boro turned to look at him, surprised. His father had never spoken of such things. "What did you do?" The old man's face was sad in the fading light. "I did nothing. I was afraid, just as you are. I told myself that my duties were here, that my family needed me, that it was foolish to chase dreams when there was real work to be done. I buried that feeling and went on with my life." He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was heavy. "I have had a good life. I do not regret my family, my work, the years I spent on the water. But there is something else, a wondering, a question that has followed me all these years. What would have happened if I had been brave enough to follow that call? What might I have discovered? I will never know. And that not knowing has been a weight I have carried every day since." He turned to face his son directly, his old eyes bright with something that might have been tears. "Do not make my mistake, Boro. Do not wait until you are old, and your body will not carry you to wonder what might have been. If something is calling you, answer it. If you have seen footprints on a path you do not understand, follow them. The fishing will still be here. Your family will still love you. But this call, this stirring in your heart, it may not wait forever. It may grow quiet if you ignore it too long, and then you will be left, as I have been left, with nothing but questions." Boro sat with his father's words long after the old man had gone to bed. He watched the stars emerge over the dark water. He felt the fear that had been holding him back, the comfortable weight of the familiar life, the thousand reasons to stay where he was. But he also felt something else now, the weight of his father's regret, the cost of not following, the knowledge that turning away from the call would not make it disappear. It would only add the burden of wandering to all the other burdens he carried. The next morning, Boro spoke with his wife. He told her everything he had been feeling, everything he had been afraid to say. She listened without interrupting, and when he finished, she took his hands in hers. "I have seen this in you," she said. "I have watched you become more distant, more troubled. I did not know what was causing it, but I knew something was pulling at you." She squeezed his hands. "Go. Find what you are looking for. We will be here when you return. And perhaps you will come back with something that helps all of us." Boro left the next week. He did not know where he was going exactly, only the direction. Toward the mountains, toward the teachers he had heard about, toward whatever was calling him. The journey was harder than he expected. He was used to the sea, not the land. His legs ached from walking paths that went up instead of rolling with waves. He slept in strange places and ate unfamiliar food. There were moments when he wanted to turn back, when the fear rose up and told him he was a fool for leaving everything he knew. But he kept walking. One step, then another, following the footprints he had finally decided to trust. This story shows us what it costs to begin and what it costs not to begin. Boro's father carried the weight of an unanswered call for his entire life. That weight shaped him in ways he could not fully see until he was old and looking back. His gift to his son was the honesty to share this regret, to say what he had never said before. In doing so, he gave Boro something precious, the chance to choose differently. The Buddha left his palace and his family to seek the truth. This was not abandonment or selfishness. It was following a call so strong that ignoring it would have been a kind of death, a slow suffocation of the spirit. Many of us feel smaller versions of this call, a pull towards something we cannot name, a restlessness that will not be satisfied by the life we are living, a sense that we are meant for something more, though we cannot say what. The question is whether we will have the courage to follow. Zen teaches that hesitation is itself a form of answer. When we see the footprints and do not follow, we are choosing. We are choosing the familiar over the unknown, the comfortable over the challenging, the life we have over the life that might be possible. This is not necessarily wrong. There are times when staying is the right choice, when duty and love require us to remain where we are. But we should make this choice consciously, knowing what we are choosing and what we are releasing. Boro's father did not choose consciously. He let fear decide for him, and he lived with the wondering for the rest of his days. Buddhism shows us that the path requires commitment, not blind faith that ignores doubt, but a willingness to take the next step, even when we cannot see where it leads. This commitment is tested again and again as we walk. The doubts return. The fears arise. The old life calls us back, with its promise of comfort and familiarity. Each time, we must choose again. Each time, we must find the courage to continue. The footprints do not carry us. We must walk them ourselves, one step at a time, trusting that the path will support us. In a village nestled among hills covered with tea plants, there lived a young woman named Pira, who had always been different from the others. While her friends were content with the life the village offered, Pira was always asking questions. Why were things the way they were? What lay beyond the hills? Was there more to life than planting and harvesting and growing old in the same place where you were born? Her questions made the other villagers uncomfortable. They were good people, satisfied with their lot, and they did not understand why Pira could not be satisfied too. Her parents worried about her. Her friends grew distant. She learned to keep her questions to herself, but they did not go away. They only went deeper, becoming a constant companion she spoke to in the silence of her own mind. When Pira was 19, a teacher passed through the village. She was an older woman who traveled from place to place, sharing teachings about the nature of mind and the possibility of peace. She stayed for 3 days, speaking to whoever wished to listen. Most of the villagers came once out of curiosity and did not return. But Pira came every time. She sat at the front and listened with her whole being. The teacher spoke of things Pira had always sensed, but never had words for. The restlessness that comes from seeking happiness in things that cannot provide it. The peace that becomes available when we stop struggling against the way things are. The path that countless seekers had walked before, leaving footprints for those who came after. On the last evening, Pira approached the teacher as she was preparing to leave. "I want to learn more," Pira said. "I want to follow this path you speak of, but I do not know how. I am just a village girl. I have no money, no connections, no special abilities." The teacher looked at her with kind, steady eyes. The path does not require money or connections. It requires only sincerity, the willingness to question, to learn, to change. You have this already. I can see it in you. But where do I go? What do I do? There is a community of practitioners in the town of Shenmu, 3 weeks' walk from here. They accept anyone who comes with a sincere heart. Go there. Tell them I sent you. Begin your training. The rest will unfold as it needs to. Pira felt excitement and terror in equal measure. 3 weeks' walk, alone, to a place she had never seen, to live among strangers, to pursue something her family and friends would not understand. I am afraid, she admitted. The teacher smiled. Of course you are. Fear is natural when we face the unknown. But fear is not a reason to stay where we are. It is just a feeling, like any other feeling. It arises and it passes. You do not have to obey it. You can feel the fear and take the step anyway. She placed a hand on Pira's shoulder. The path is real. The footprints are there. You have seen them. Now you must decide whether you will follow them or spend your life wondering what might have been. Pira left 3 days later. She told her parents she was going to study in a distant town, which was true in a way, though not the way they understood it. Her mother cried. Her father was silent and confused. Her friends looked at her as if she had lost her mind. The journey was longer and harder than she had imagined. She had never been more than a day's walk from her village. The world she knew was small and familiar, bounded by the tea-covered hills she had looked at every day of her life. Now she walked through landscapes she had never seen, past towns where people spoke with unfamiliar accents, and ate foods she did not recognize, along roads that seemed to stretch forever toward a horizon that never got closer. She walked through rain that soaked her to the bone, and had to shelter under trees until it passed. She walked through heat that made her head spin and had to rest in the shade of roadside shrines. She slept in fields when she could find no shelter, wrapped in her thin blanket, listening to sounds she could not identify. She ate sparingly, making her small supply of food last as long as possible, sometimes going a full day with nothing but water. There were nights when she lay under the stars and wondered what she was doing. She thought about turning back. She thought about the comfortable life she had left behind, the warmth of her mother's kitchen, the safety of the familiar, the ease of being what everyone expected her to be. She thought about what she would say if she returned now, how she would explain her failure, how she would live with the knowledge that she had not been strong enough. The fear came in waves, sometimes so strong she could barely breathe. It whispered to her in the darkness. It told her she was foolish, that she was not special, that the teacher had been wrong to see something in her, that she would arrive at Shenmu and be turned away, that she would end up alone and lost with nowhere to go. But she kept walking. Each morning, no matter how she felt, she rose and took the first step, then the next, then the next. She remembered what the teacher had said. Fear is just a feeling. It arises and it passes. You do not have to obey it. Somewhere in the second week, something began to shift. The fear did not disappear, but it became smaller, less commanding, just one voice among many instead of the only voice. Pira realized that she had been afraid her whole life, afraid of her own questions, afraid of being different, afraid of wanting something her world did not understand, afraid of discovering that she was wrong about everything. The walking was teaching her that she could feel afraid and still move forward. That courage was not the absence of fear, but the willingness to act despite it. That her legs would carry her even when her heart was trembling. When she finally arrived at Shenmu, exhausted and travel-worn, she found the community the teacher had described. Simple buildings around a courtyard. People in plain robes going about their work with a quiet purposefulness. When she explained who had sent her, she was welcomed with warmth and given a place to stay. The training was difficult. There were hours of sitting in meditation when her legs ached and her mind raced. There were teachings she did not understand and practices that seemed pointless. There were moments when she felt completely lost, when she wondered if she had made a terrible mistake. But she stayed. She sat through the difficulty. She asked questions when she did not understand. She let herself not know, let herself be a beginner, let herself fail and try again. Slowly, over months that stretched into years, something began to change in her. The restlessness that had driven her all her life began to settle. The questions that had tormented her began to find, if not answers, then a different relationship. She was not the same person who had left the village. She was becoming something new. And it had all started with a decision to follow the footprints. A decision to trust that the path was real, even when she could not see where it led. A decision to take one step, then another, until the journey became her life. This story shows us what persistence looks like on the path. Pira did not find instant answers or immediate peace. She found difficulty, doubt, and moments when turning back seemed like the only sensible choice. She found exhaustion and loneliness and fear. But she kept walking. She kept showing up. She let the path shape her, even when the shaping was painful. And slowly, through the simple act of continuing, she became someone new. The Buddha taught that the path is gradual. We do not leap from confusion to clarity in a single bound. We take many small steps, each one building on the one before. There are setbacks and difficulties. There are times when we seem to be going backward instead of forward, when the progress we thought we made dissolves into doubt. But if we keep walking, if we keep following the footprints, we slowly become different. We slowly become free. The transformation happens not in spite of the difficulty, but through it. Zen emphasizes just this: showing up. The elaborate philosophies and profound experiences matter less than the simple act of continuing. Sitting when you do not want to sit. Walking when your legs are tired. Staying with the practice when it seems pointless and you cannot remember why you started. This persistence is not glamorous. It does not make for exciting stories, but it is what actually works. It is what actually transforms us. The path reveals itself to those who walk it, not to those who merely think about walking. Buddhism shows us that trust deepens through walking. At the beginning, we follow the footprints with little more than hope and longing. We trust because we have glimpsed something, because something calls us, because staying where we are has become unbearable. But as we walk, as we persist through difficulty, the trust becomes something more solid. We see that the path is real because we are living it. We know that peace is possible because we are beginning to taste it. The footprints we followed on faith become the ground beneath our feet. What was hope becomes knowledge. What was belief becomes experience. Take a gentle breath now and just pause for a moment. The uncertainty of life is part of the journey. The Buddha did not promise his followers that the path would be obvious from the start. He said it must be walked, tested, experienced. The truth reveals itself through living, not through belief alone. We take steps in the dark, trusting that light will come. And gradually, it does. As we walk, as we continue following the signs we have glimpsed, something begins to change. The footprints that seemed so faint become clearer. The path that felt imaginary becomes solid beneath our feet. We look back at where we have been and see, with growing wonder, that the trail was there all along. Every step we took was on the path, even the steps we thought were mistakes. Every doubt we felt was part of the journey. Every moment of confusion was leading us forward. This is how the path becomes real. Not all at once, but gradually, through the accumulated evidence of our own experience. We began with hope. We continue with something stronger, a knowing that comes not from books or teachers, but from walking the ground ourselves. Zen speaks of this as the confirmation that arises from practice. We hear the teachings and we wonder if they are true. We try the practices and we doubt whether they are working. But if we persist, if we keep following the footprints, there comes a time when we no longer wonder. We know, not because someone told us, but because we have lived it. The path that seemed like a possibility becomes the path we are walking. The peace that seemed like a distant dream becomes the peace we are beginning to taste. Tonight, as we come to the end of our journey together, let us explore how the path becomes real. In a town where the river met the sea, there lived a tea house owner named Nori, who had been following the footprints for many years. She had not always been a seeker. For the first half of her life, she had been like most people, busy with the demands of daily existence, too occupied to wonder about deeper things. She had inherited the tea house from her mother, who had inherited it from her mother before her. It was a modest place, a few low tables in a room overlooking the water, where travelers and locals came to rest and drink tea and watch the boats pass by. Nori had run it capably, serving her customers with efficiency, if not particular warmth. It was work. It paid the bills. It filled the hours. She did not expect more from it than that. The change had begun quietly, so quietly she almost did not notice. It started with a regular customer, an elderly man who came each afternoon to sit by the window and drink his tea in silence. He was unremarkable in most ways. His clothes were simple. His face was weathered by years. He never said much, just ordered his tea, watched the water, and sat in a stillness that seemed to fill the space around him. Nori had served many customers over the years, but something about this man was different. When she brought him his tea, she felt herself slow down. The rush that usually propelled her through her days would ease for a moment. She would set down the cup and feel, just briefly, as if nothing else existed. Just this moment. Just this cup. Just this quiet man looking out at the river. She began to look forward to his visits. Not because they talked, for they rarely exchanged more than a few words, but because, in his presence, something in her settled. The endless chatter in her mind would quiet. The worries that usually crowded her thoughts would recede. She felt more herself, though she could not have explained what that meant. One afternoon, after months of these silent visits, Nori gathered the courage to ask him a question. "Forgive me," she said, setting down his tea. But I have noticed something about you. You seem so peaceful, so at ease. I have run this tea house for 20 years, and I have never seen anyone sit the way you sit. What do you know that I do not? The old man looked at her with kind eyes. He was quiet for a moment, as if considering whether to speak. I have been practicing for a long time, he finally said. Watching my mind, learning to be present, following footprints that were left by those who came before me. Practicing what? Following what footprints? He smiled gently. There is a path, a way of being that leads to peace. I did not believe it at first. I thought peace was for monks and hermits, not for ordinary people like me. But I was wrong. The path is for anyone who wishes to walk it. The footprints are everywhere. Once you learn to see them, Nori felt something stir in her chest. A recognition, a longing she had not known she carried. How do I find these footprints? How do I begin? The old man gestured to the cup of tea between them. You have already begun. You notice something. You asked a question. This is how it starts. He lifted the cup and held it in both hands, feeling its warmth. The footprints are in this moment. In the attention you bring to pouring tea. In the pause between one task and the next. In the willingness to be here, now, instead of lost in thoughts about elsewhere. He took a sip of tea, then set the cup down carefully. I cannot give you the path. I can only point toward it. But if you are sincere, if you truly wish to find peace, you will discover that the footprints are already all around you. You have been walking past them your whole life. Now you are beginning to see them. That conversation changed everything for Nori. Not dramatically, not all at once, but in the way that water changes stone. Slowly, persistently, irrevocably. She began to pay attention in ways she never had before. When she poured tea, she noticed the pouring. When she wiped the tables, she felt the cloth in her hand, the smooth wood beneath it. When customers spoke to her, she listened not just to respond, but to truly hear. Small changes, barely visible to anyone watching, but something was shifting inside her. The old man continued to come each afternoon. Sometimes he would offer a word or two of guidance. Notice when your mind wanders. Come back to what is here. Do not judge yourself for losing the way. Just return. Again and again, return. But mostly, he simply sat in his peaceful silence, and that silence taught her more than any words could have. She sought out other sources of learning. She found books about meditation and read them late at night after the tea house closed. She attended talks by teachers who passed through the town. She began to sit in silence each morning before opening, just for a few minutes at first, then longer. The practices were simple. The path was not complicated. But walking it day after day, year after year, that was the work. That was where the transformation happened. There were times of doubt, times when the practice felt pointless and she wondered if she was fooling herself. Times when old habits surged back and she felt as lost as ever. Times when she thought about giving up, going back to the life she had lived before, the life of busyness and distraction that at least had the comfort of being familiar. But she kept going. She kept following the footprints. And slowly, so slowly she could not have said when it happened, something changed. The restlessness that had always been with her began to settle. The dissatisfaction that had colored everything began to lift. She found herself content in ways she had never been content before. Not because her circumstances were different. The tea house was the same. The customers were the same. The work was the same. But she was different. She was present in her own life in a way she had never been. Years passed. The old man eventually stopped coming. Nori heard that he had moved to the mountains to spend his final years in a small hermitage. She never saw him again, but she did not need to. He had given her the gift of pointing, and she had walked far enough on the path that she no longer needed someone to show her the way. One evening, a young traveler stopped at her tea house. She was weary from the road, her clothes dusty, her face tight with some unnamed worry. Nori served her tea and sat with her for a moment, as she often did now with customers who seemed to need company. "You seem troubled," Nori said gently. The young woman looked up with tired eyes. "I am searching for something. I do not even know what. I just know that life as I have been living it is not enough. I feel like there must be more, but I do not know where to find it." Nori smiled. She remembered feeling exactly this way, many years ago, before the old man had first pointed her toward the footprints. "Tell me," she said, "have you ever noticed how it feels to truly pay attention to something? Not while thinking about other things, but completely? Just one thing, filling your whole awareness?" The young woman considered this. "I do not think I have. My mind is always busy. Always somewhere else. That busyness is what hides what you are seeking. The peace you long for is not somewhere else. It is here, in this moment, waiting for you to notice. But the busy mind keeps you from seeing it." She pushed the teacup closer to the young woman. "Try something. Pick up this cup. Feel its weight in your hands. Feel the warmth of the tea through the clay. Do not think about it. Just feel it." The young woman picked up the cup. She held it, frowning slightly with concentration. "What do you notice?" Nori asked. "It is warm. Heavier than I expected. The surface is a little rough." "Good. Now take a sip. But do not drink the way you usually drink. Drink as if this were the first cup of tea you had ever tasted. Notice everything." The young woman raised the cup to her lips and drank. Something in her face softened. The tightness around her eyes eased just slightly. "There," Nori said. "That moment of attention, that is the beginning. That is the first footprint. The path you are seeking starts right here, with something as simple as truly tasting your tea." The young woman looked at her with wonder. "But how does drinking tea lead to peace? How does noticing things change anything?" Nori laughed softly. "I asked the same question many years ago. A wise man told me that the footprints are everywhere, once you learn to see them. I did not understand what he meant, but I followed his guidance. I practiced noticing. I practiced being here. And over time, slowly, the path became clear." She gestured to the tea house around them. The simple wooden walls, the view of the river in the fading light, the steam rising from the pot. "I have run this tea house for over 30 years now. The work has not changed, but I have changed. I used to serve tea while thinking about 100 other things. Now I serve tea. Just this cup. Just this customer. just this moment. And in that simplicity, there is peace. Not because the circumstances are special, but because I am finally here to experience them. The young woman was quiet for a long moment. How do I continue? How do I find more footprints? You pay attention. You notice when your mind pulls you away, and you come back. Again and again, you come back to what is here. That is the whole practice. It sounds simple, and it is simple, but it is also the work of a lifetime. Each time you return to the present moment, you are taking a step on the path. Each moment of true attention is a footprint showing you the way. Nori rose to attend to another customer who had just arrived. But before she left, she placed her hand briefly on the young woman's shoulder. "The path is real," she said. "I know because I have walked it. The peace you seek is real. I know because I have found it. Not perfectly, not completely, but enough to know it exists. Enough to know that every step you take toward it is worthwhile." She smiled. "You came here looking for something. Perhaps you have found the first footprint. Trust the path. It has been walked by countless seekers before you, and it will be walked by countless more after. You are not alone on this journey." This story shows us where the path can lead. Nori began where many of us begin, with a glimpse, a question, a longing for something more. She followed the footprints with patience and persistence, through doubt and difficulty, for many years. And what she found was not a dramatic transformation, but a quiet revolution. She became present in her own life. She found peace not by escaping her circumstances, but by fully inhabiting them. The Buddha taught that the path is available to everyone, not just monks or scholars, or those with special gifts. Anyone who sincerely follows the footprints can find what Nori found. The peace that comes from presence. The freedom that comes from no longer running away from this moment. The simple joy of being fully here, now, in whatever life offers. Zen shows us that the extraordinary is hidden in the ordinary. Serving tea, wiping tables, watching boats pass on the river. These simple activities become doorways to awakening when we bring our full attention to them. We do not need to seek far away. We do not need to climb distant mountains or find secret teachings. The path is here. The footprints are in this very moment, waiting for us to see them. Buddhism teaches that the journey has no final destination, only deepening. Nori did not arrive at some point where the practice was complete and she could stop. She continued walking, continued paying attention, continued returning to the present moment. This is the nature of the path. It is not about reaching an end. It is about walking with ever greater presence, ever deeper peace, ever more complete engagement with the life we have been given. The footprints that seemed so faint at the beginning of our journey tonight have become clearer. The path that seemed uncertain has revealed itself. We have explored how the signs appear, how we learn to see them, how nature teaches us, how guides point the way, how suffering opens doors, how courage carries us forward. And now we see that all of this leads to something real, a peace that can be lived, a presence that can be practiced, a path that becomes more solid with every step we take. As we come to the end of our time together tonight, let yourself settle even more deeply into rest. We have explored the discovery of the footprints. We have seen how the signs appear through people and words, through nature and guides, through the very difficulties we wish to escape. We have felt what it means to learn, to see, to find the courage to follow, to persist when the way grows hard. And we have arrived at the simple truth that the path is real. It has been walked by countless seekers before us, and it waits for us now, clear and patient, ready to receive our next step. You do not need to remember all of this. The stories and teachings have done their work. They have settled into you like seeds falling onto quiet earth. In their own time, in their own way, they will grow. For now, there is nothing more to do. The footprints have been found. The direction is clear. You can rest now, trusting that the path will still be there when you wake. Trusting that each moment of presence, each breath of awareness, is itself a step on the way. Sleep will come when it is ready. There is no need to chase it. Simply allow yourself to be here, held by this night, held by the ancient wisdom that has guided seekers for thousands of years. You are part of that great river of seekers now. You are walking where others have walked. You are never alone. The path is real, and you are already on your way. Sleep well, and thank you for joining us here at Sleepy Monk.